You can just gauge someone's West Coast swing level by how they sit in a chair. Am I wrong, though?
You're not.
Welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and points don't matter. We are here to help train your eyes so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive experience in training in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 21 years. I have about 23. And tonight we are talking through a variety of dances. We're looking at all of the first place dances from Capital 2018. So looking from novice all the way through champion, and we might touch on masters. We'll see if we have time. But yeah, we're just going to kind of go through and talk about judging, really, is kind of what we're going to be going over. And probably touching on some things that are not commonly shared about Spotlight specifically that we feel is important to know. So I know, Cassie, you have a preamble, so I will let you do that.
I do. I took profuse notes for this week. We'll see how many of them I get through.
Yeah.
But basically, we're going to be looking at comparing and contrasting these dances based on timing, teamwork, technique, musicality, but also because they're spotlights, how they start their dances together. And so we're just going to go from novice all the way to champion, and depending on how fast we're going, we may or may not include masters after intermediate. So the first dance is, I didn't take note of their names, but I have the link. So we're looking at novice, first place first. Link is in the chat. Go ahead and give it a watch. And when you're done, we will get to analyzing. To the screen share. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention, and this is like a really important note that I would say a lot of people don't mention, is that in a spotlight, you have your audience. Oh, that's why an arrow? Why is it not a pen? You have the audience over here. But what happens is the leaders are always on this side. The follows are always on this side. Mm-hmm. And if you stay on those sides and you go into closed position, the closed side of the partnership is facing the audience. And that automatically is detracting from the performance and your ability to engage with the audience and to show yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's a really small thing, but it can make a huge difference. And as we watch the rest of the dances, you'll see how much of a difference opening up to the audience at the beginning of the dance can make, and how jarring it can feel at a higher level when they don't do that.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Royston and Laureen like sumo somethinged into there.
But the music hadn't started yet. We're not analyzing pre-music antics. Although that might be a really dumb episode to do for like April Fools or something. I'm here for it.
Just antics in general.
Yeah, antics in general. So not only are they closed to us, the audience, which is much more evident now that the camera has moved in closer, but they do body rolls. Mm-hmm. And the random looking at the audience thing. Like,
I love that they're choosing to engage the audience, though.
I know. It's like they realized, oh, we're not looking at the audience. Crap. Look at the audience, which, good thought process. They're problem solving here, which I appreciate. Mm-hmm. That being said, just undulating. We're just going to use that word over and over and over again. Undulating isn't necessarily dancing, if you know what I mean. It's a little bit more gimmicky pandering as opposed to some sort of dance to get the dance started, if that makes sense. But that's not to say this didn't absolutely delight me when I saw it the first time.
Yeah.
I will say that. It makes
For
me happy in my heart.
for a novice spotlight, it's a really fun one, and it's a
Yeah,
really good
it's
one.
wonderful.
I think it's probably one of the better ones that I've seen. Not that I tend to watch a ton of novice spotlights, but the ones that I've seen, this is a really fun one. And I do love that they, aren't showing any nerves necessarily, even though they probably are feeling them. But, like adjusting to what they get into. I mean, that's super important. I love that about the beginning of this dance, right? Because they get into closed position with the arms facing the audience, but then they realize, oh, we should probably, look at the audience. And so they just kind of adjust to that. And I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I love that they're taking the time to kind of like hang out there for a minute, even though we have the body rolls. But I think that their goal was probably to just kind of, hang out there and feel the music, see where they're going with the music, which is important. It's very important to kind of chill out first.
Yes.
Before you, especially in lower levels when there's a higher chance that you haven't danced with said person that you have drawn. When you get to higher levels, it's more likely that you have heard the song because you've been around longer. So you've probably heard the popular ones. But B, there's a higher chance that you know your partner, that you've danced with your partner at least socially once or twice. So, at those lower levels, it's really good to take that time to figure out the music first, get the timing and then start going.
Yep. And then kind of as an extension of that conversation, it's really common to feel this urge to send out early, to go from closed position to open position early. And that's a combination of nerves, discomfort in closed position, which can be worse if you don't know the person.
Yeah.
But to just arbitrarily send out your partner at the beginning of a song when it's not musically indicated is a more novice level choice. As we move up in the divisions tonight, you'll see how the timing of when the leader chooses to send the follow out into open position becomes a much more purposeful decision. And so that's another thing that we're seeing here. So while that was like a lovely send out, timing wise, it wasn't as musical as it could have been. If they had stayed in closed position longer, that would have been to their benefit.
There was something I was going to add to that. I can't remember.
Oh, and for those of you who are new joining us live tonight, you're always welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question while we're going, or to put a question in the chat.
Yes. In theory, I can see the chat. So
yes. So another thing that these dancers do really well throughout this dance is they're paying really good attention to each other.
Yes.
Visually, neither one is trying to outdance the other. They really are working as a partnership on a team where they're trying to create something together, because that's what the teamwork part means.
Yeah.
It's that you're in this together, you're both creating a dance together, and you both want the other to succeed, and you want both of you to succeed together. So it's a really important mindset to carry into, I would say, any dance, regardless of whether it's competitive or social.
We had a comment. It says, only if you have time, would love if you all could talk about differences on what to be mindful of in Spotlight 1 couple, Spotlight 3 couples versus all skate.
Oh, yeah, let's maybe touch on that at the end. Yeah, but that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking. Remind us if we forget once we've gone through all the videos.
And Michael says spotlights are not usually done in Novice in Australia. They're not usually done in general. Anywhere. There are a couple events that do them. I know Capital does them and Boogie does them.
Yeah.
I don't know anywhere else that does necessarily.
Yeah, it used to be more common, and Swing Diego used to, but we
Yeah.
don't have Swing Diego anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the events that do them, they just automatically spotlight every single Jack and Jill final, and it's just, that's what they do on Sunday.
Yeah. Which I feel like there is positives and negatives to that. Generally, it's all-star champ that are spotlighted. Sometimes advanced is spotlighted, but the problem is that when you are going up these ranks, you're only doing like either, heated or like very rarely spotlights, but there's not quite a building on that, so you don't get to feel comfortable in that spotlight. And that's something like, I mean, like, even for me as a very experienced dancer in front of audiences, like, that's kind of nerve-wracking. Like, when you don't have that, like, warm up to it, and I think that part of that is because a lot of dancers come into this dance and compete without any previous dance experience. So, like for me, I get sometimes nervous in that situation, not for myself, but because I don't know how my partner is going to do in that situation. And that's what kind of makes me a little bit nervous. But, it's harder to just get thrown into like spotlights as, all stars. Let's see, Michael said spotlights are done for intermediate and advanced all-star in Australia as well, due to how small the community is.
Right. That makes sense. It's really interesting because I started competing in West Coast Swing in 2008. And at that time, not only was the community smaller, but because of that, in general, the quality of the dancing was higher, and it was much more common to see spotlights for Jack and Jills at all the levels at many events. And over the years, as we have gotten a larger community, which is wonderful, just by function of the math, we have more novice people in the community, which is wonderful. But that being said, it means it's better for the health of the dancing and the community to reduce who can do spotlights, because the problem that was happening was novice dancers were trying to have the flair and the pizzazz of champion dancers, but they didn't have the technique or the skill to support that kind of dancing. And that's something that I know personally I really struggle with when I watch spotlights in lower levels. I see these dancers trying to be champions when they're not. And that's actually something I really appreciate about this dance, because they're just trying to be solid and on time and have a good time and partner each other, as opposed to pandering to the audience in any sort of way.
Yeah, I know a lot of times in, competition situations, people are kind of told to ignore their partner if they want to make finals. And then they get to finals and they have that same mentality, which is a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a problem in general to say ignore your partner, but it's a problem especially when it comes to finals when you are judged as a partnership.
Yep.
Michael said 100% too much reward for flashover skill.
Yes.
I do see a trend of that getting better.
Yes,
however,
I agree.
But yes, a lot of times it's easier to reward something that looks cool.
Right. So now if we're thinking about basic timing and technique, I want to highlight Tim a little bit, because we've also not only was he kind enough to join us on our Tall Follow panel last year, but we've analyzed another specific video of his following with Dylan Luther, and when I edit this for YouTube, I'll put a link to that up above. But you can see how his technique with his pitch has changed drastically in these past few years. When he was a more novice dancer, he was very forward pitched. And he's about 5'10", 5'11", like my height, which is very tall for a follow. And having just 5 degrees of pitch, when you when you're this tall, it's that far over, but when you're this tall, it's that far over. And so the taller you are, the less degree of pitch you want to have, regardless of direction, just because you're a taller person. And if you go and watch his more recent dancing, you'll see how much more upright he is. So that's just something I wanted to highlight.
Yeah. That's something that you tend to see in lower levels, the pitch forward, simply because people are taking steps that are too large.
Yep. All right, so I want to make sure I get through everything on the list with the novice before we move on to intermediate.
Yes.
I really appreciate how they're using very functional technique with their partnering. Like they are dancing the integrity of this dance and together, and you can tell that they both understand the basic fundamentals of how West Coast swing works. That being said, there is less refinement to adjusting to partners, which is a little bit more evident from the leader to Tim. You can see how there's this line that's being led downward, which is increasing Tim Kenny's drive forward, and he's having to brake against it because the handhold is not only going that way, but also that way. And to effectively adjust to a taller follow, like we talked a lot about on the Tall Follow panel, is you want to create a level experience for the follow that's going straight down the slot for leads. And then another thing, a few more things I want to highlight is one of the things that really distinguishes a more novice dancer from a very high level dancer of any style, not just West Coast swing, is their ability to transition between movements in a graceful and controlled manner. And when in a partner dance, that is compounded because you not only have to do that in and of yourself, but you have to react to and contribute to the connection also in a graceful and controlled manner. It makes it 10 times more complicated. And so one of the things that can be interesting to pay attention to solely, if you were to go back and like binge watch all of these first places one after the other, simply pay attention to the transitions between patterns and musicality. Oh, now I suddenly have a chat box. What? Okay, we're putting that over here. Cool. That was super random. Oh, and now it's gone again. Excellent. Love you, Zoom. But smooth transitions where just because it's the end of the pattern, like logically but there isn't like a stop and then a start again at the end of one pattern into another. They bleed into one another, but with a clarity to distinguish them, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying.
So there's this paradoxical thing, but it's basically we understand where the end of a pattern is and where the beginning is. But if someone didn't know, if someone had no idea that the anchor was the period at the end of the West Coast swing sentence, and they just came and watched the dancing, they might think the period is somewhere else because high-level dancers transition so smoothly between those 2 points.
Yeah. I also want to add to that like that's not something that should be expected at a novice level. It's something to work towards. And B, I've touched on it before, but the reason that a lot of the champ dancers have other dancing experience is because they have that ability to smooth things out so well and connect things very easily in their dancing and their movements.
All right. And then just a couple of things. We don't have time to actually highlight these, but if you were to go back and watch the video, about half of the phrase changes are accented in this spotlight, and not necessarily on purpose or in advance of the fact. They'll be like, oh, we just had a phrase change. Let's do something slightly different. So it's less precognitive and more reactive. Mm-hmm. And then also at this novice level, there are occasional partnered intended accents kind of scattered here and there. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else about this particular spotlight you wanted to highlight, Alicia?
Not necessarily. I think just overall, like, even though there are some critiques for this particular spotlight, keep in mind that we're critiquing in terms of if we're looking at higher level dancing, like what we want to work towards, not necessarily like where they should be, because where they should be, like, I feel as though this dance in particular really shows like where a solid novice level dancer should be at in terms of like their partnering skills, you know, their patterns, and just in general, like there is a good amount of like things to build upon that they have.
Yeah, I agree. This is an excellent example of a really well done novice dance.
Mm-hmm. Intermediate, we're looking at Elizabeth Ferreira.
Yes.
And David something. I forget. Sue.
All right. Here's the link. Go ahead and give it a watch. And when you're done, we will get to analyzing.
Mine's done.
All right, cool. So I'm going to talk about just a couple of things before we go to the screen share, because it's hard for me to read notes, talk, and press the forward button. So yes. So we didn't talk too terribly much about timing with novice, but now that we have another dance to kind of compare it to in our minds, I want to talk about timing a little bit. Because there's a kind of progression from kind of like mostly clean but rough around the edges timing, which is a novice, which is like what we want. We want it to be like rough around the edges but clean most of the time. And it's okay if there's some mistakes here and there. And then as we go up the levels, we're progressing toward much cleaner but also clearer timing, that we're not only seeing in the foot strikes, but we can see that timing reflected through the body. And then more refined timing where we're being more conscious and we have more control over the relationship between foot strike and weight transfer over that foot strike. So that's kind of like the progression we're seeing from novice to champion, is adding more control and refinement to the timing. Yeah, so that was like a little bit I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and I would say that refinement a lot of times when you get to the really higher levels is musicality. It's not so much just like, you know, foot strike and weight transfer. There's more to it. There's all of that plus like playing with really minute details in the music.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of how all of these layers go as you move up the levels. It's like within musicality, there are so many mini umbrellas underneath that, and under timing and under partnering and under technique. And so you have this interesting effect where from novice to champion, you've got multiple mountains you're climbing simultaneously. And they kind of, and we'll see this a little bit, and I'll be interested to see if you agree with this, Alicia, because we've never explicitly talked about this. But I feel like that all comes to a head in advanced, where everyone has mastered like one mountain, but they're still climbing up a few others. And then they all have different combinations. So you get this partnership where like one person's timing is really strong and the other person's partnering is really strong, but the other stuff isn't quite to that level. And so you get this really weird science experiment. It's like, oh, what's going to happen here? So it's just something to keep in mind, that there isn't necessarily a clear cut, this is advanced, this is intermediate. It's more of like, what percentage of all the mountains have you climbed? And if you've climbed one all the way to the top and another one is closer to the bottom, that could still get you to advanced, but then you have more to make up for to move into all-star.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would say that ideally you want to move up each at the same amount.
Yes.
Like
Agreed.
as you're moving up in ranks, like as you're moving from novice, intermediate, advanced, all-star, right? You want to try to be equal in, you know, your understanding of each part of dancing and, you know, just West Coast in general. And I think that that is something that so I feel like there tends to be a lot of complaining about higher level dancers. And I feel like, you know, the reason is because there tends to be that uneven movement on those different understandings. So typically, you know, like as you get up in higher levels, you know, somebody's really strong at one thing, but not as good at the other. And so it kind of, whatever they're not as strong at becomes kind of more visible because everyone else, you know, in that level, or, you know, a large chunk of people in that same level have advanced their knowledge in that specific thing. So we see these kind of gaps, and it's something that does tend to be complained about, but it really is that we need to try to make sure that we are having a very good understanding of every piece as we're moving up. And that's going to prevent all of that, you know, like visible problems and whatnot. So
Right.
I want to add that. I know that's kind of a touchy topic, you know, but I do want to say that because I think that it's toxic to an extent when you get to those higher levels and people are complaining about other dancers. It is. And we don't want that. That's not the goal. That's not going to create a positive energy in the community. And it's not going to make dancing fun for people, which is why we're all here. So, you know, we really want to try to keep, like, start with a good foundation and keep building on that as we work up the ranks.
Yeah, and I would also add to that to remove some of the responsibility from the individual dancer, especially the lower levels they are, from not having climbed them at the same rate, because at that point that's the community's responsibility and all of the teachers' responsibility as well. And especially in this dance, we have so many specialists at the higher levels that if you don't have the knowledge and the understanding to be like, okay, I'm going to Victoria for some hip hop for my dancing. Instead, you're just going to Victoria because you like Victoria and you're like, fix me, Victoria. You're not going to get a holistic, cohesive training for your dancing, which is why it can be really helpful to have, like, I call them primary dance doctors, PDPs, to kind of bridge the gap between private lessons with champions that you can't see all the time, unless you have one in your in like your neighborhood that you can go see all the time. So just something to keep in mind. It's the responsibility of the entire community to help dancers move up those different mountains at the same rate instead of overweighing one over the other.
Yeah.
Well, it's not exciting to talk about that tonight.
Yeah, no, I wasn't either.
I know. Seems necessary though. All right, to the screen share. So right off the bat, you'll notice that they're in closed position, but the open side of the connection is towards us, the audience. Really simple, but makes a huge difference. In addition, they try, this is an interesting thing that I noticed as a pattern. So in Novice, you're like, closed position is uncomfortable. I need to escape. This is a dramatization. Dramatization. This is not what people actually think. And then in intermediate, you're like, oh no, I need to stay in it longer. But the discomfort wins out too soon. And then in the higher levels, there's ability to be a little bit more proactiveness and choice of when you exit the closed position. It's just something I've noticed. It's kind of entertaining when you think about it.
I want to add on to that in general. Like as you progress further into your dance journey, I think it is generally like you as a dancer are more comfortable taking your time with things. Like one of my big pet peeves is when people rush through things unnecessarily, like when it's not musically necessary. And instead of being able to take the time and breathe, especially when it's something that you can hear in the music, like when, the music slows down or something like that, where there's a pause or, anything that makes it musically necessary. But it's really important to start at lower levels, trying to be okay with not constantly doing something. Like that's okay. I think that people get the idea that like, oh no, but I have to be doing something. And
right.
It's not necessary. Some songs, especially like the really slower songs, it's okay to take the time and not always move. Anyways.
Yeah. And if you think about like who tends to be one of the universally loved champion dancers, Brandy Guild, her brand is stopping and mesmerizing, essentially. Like she can reduce her movement to a trickle or stop altogether and engage you with her eyes, and you're sold. You're like, take my money. It's one of those situations. And she's basically, that's what she's doing. She's capitalizing on the fact that she can take her time. So another thing I wanted to highlight about this dance versus the novice dance, extrapolating on that presenting to the audience situation. In the novice spotlight, we tended to see the leader's number like more than half of the time, which meant that as an individual, he was presenting more to his fellow competitors in the back than the audience. Whereas in this spotlight, they do a really lovely job of presenting the fronts of their bodies to us more often than not.
Yes.
Which I will say is a really important distinction. That's what you do in a spotlight. But in a heated format, it is really, really important to show your number to the judges. I can't tell you how many times, and this is even because I don't judge at large scale events, but I'll judge at local things very frequently. How many times I have not been able to judge someone because I have given them their 10 seconds. That's usually more than I give other people, and I still haven't seen their number, so I can't put a note down. And I have to move on. I can't spend a minute waiting for that dancer to show me their number. And it's just something to think about. So if you do something that you know was awesome, immediately show your number afterwards. So that way they can associate the awesome thing you just did to a number on their clipboard. It may seem really simple, but it literally makes a huge difference, especially the larger the competition. Your judges need to know who they're looking at. And even if they know you personally, it doesn't mean they have your number memorized.
In this dance in particular, we get some more traveling and using the floor than we did really in that first novice dance. And that's something that is very important as you grow in your spotlight ability. You really want to be able to use the floor and not just stay in one spot. It becomes more dynamic when you do use the floor. And that kind of goes for routines as well.
Yeah.
If you're choreographing or having somebody choreograph for you, it needs to move across the floor. Otherwise, you just stay in one spot the whole time and it's not as dynamic.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'd say the slower the song, the more important that is. Because if it's a very slow song and you're just staying center of the floor, that's going to get tiring very fast for everyone involved, including you who are dancing.
Yes.
So what we're also starting to see now that we've moved up a level is slightly more refined transitions and partnering, slightly more complex patterns, and some more refined technique. So for example, how I highlighted Tim's pitch in the novice spotlight, Elizabeth's pitch is more upright and appropriate for her height. And also this leader, what was his name again?
John.
He's more upright too at this level. And it just makes such a huge difference when the dancers are upright as opposed to kind of like caved in. And then another thing you're starting to see as we move up into intermediate is intentional phrase changes. In this dance in particular, we see intentional phrase changes about 75% of the time, and more frequent accents to the music in between those phrase changes as a partnership. Is there anything else you want to add about this dance before we move on, Alicia?
I don't think so.
Cool. It's getting late, so I'm picking up the pace. Okay. Let me go fetch. I think we're going to skip masters because we are talkative.
Yep.
And that's on us. Oh, where'd the Zoom window go? All right. In theory, this is the advanced dance. Go ahead and give it a watch. And when you're done, we'll get to analyze. So a couple of things before we go to the screen share. Like I was mentioning earlier when I breached the whole multiple mountains metaphor, advanced has kind of become this melting pot, as it were, of disparate abilities. And that isn't necessarily what we want it to be, but that's just kind of what it has become recently. And so one of the things that happens is you're trying to be an individual. This is like where you're coming into yourself as a West Coast swing dancer, and reconciling that with partnering with someone can mess with your head. And so there's this really paradoxical issue where both leaders and followers in advance are trying to be individuals and to be additive and to show what they're capable of while paying attention to each other, which is harder to do. And this results in counterintuitively often less refined partnering than you see in novice and intermediate, because they're trying to do so much and they don't quite have the skill set yet to support that amount of more that they're trying to do. So that's one thing that we see in this dance in particular. There's this kind of not necessarily conflict between the two of them, but miscommunication. And so, especially for those of you who may be advanced watching this, really refocusing in on your partner in advanced can be so helpful. And trusting in your technique and what you're capable of instead of trying to force more. And there's also a lot more conscious, purposeful audience engagement. And like we talked about earlier, it is kind of this result of like, oh, spotlights, we're here to entertain. But that's the champions' jobs. They are paid to put on a show. You paid to be in the show. So it's not on you to entertain. It's on you to impress. Like, what can I do? What am I capable of? And do it well. I really have, you've heard me. I will groan at a good anchor. It's like, it's embarrassing, but I'm like, oh, that triple was good. I want us all to become that level of nerd. So, all right, let's see. And then the other thing that you're starting to see is repeated musical elements as a partnership to kind of tie the entire dance together.
Mhm.
So that was just one I wanted to talk about before going to the screen share. Was there anything you wanted to note first?
No, not
Okay.
before.
All right, to the screen share. His face is so excellent with that. And it's interesting. It harkens back to the Novice spotlight where they were like,
Mhm.
oh no, we're facing the wrong way. Look at the judges. But this one's like, we're looking down. Now we shall look at you.
I love the confidence from both of them.
Same. 'Tis excellent.
And I think that's something that you see as you get up the levels is more confidence. And, that's just, it comes from just improving your dancing, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that if you are somebody that doesn't feel as comfortable doing spotlights, I think working on your own technique and, the things that they're looking for, like, that's going to help you feel more comfortable. It's I feel like, you can kind of get into that mindset where like, oh, well, people are just sitting here judging me. Like, yes, there are judges for that, but everyone else really is just there to enjoy for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. And so as long as you feel like you are comfortable with your technique and your level of dance, like that's going to make it easier for you.
So another thing we tend to start seeing as we move into advanced and higher is the leaders starting to do more dancing as individuals in
Mm-hmm.
addition to just the functional patterning of what they're leading.
Yeah.
Whereas we tend to start seeing that with follows in intermediate, and leaders start expressing their musicality through what they're leading in intermediate. But in advanced, we tend to start seeing more of the leaders actually dancing in and of themselves
Yeah.
while they're leading.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily the way it should be. It's what I notice.
Mm-hmm.
But at the advanced level, it is important to start seeing both leaders and followers dancing on top of their basics.
Mm-hmm. So when you start to play more with the like minute details of musicality, I would say.
Yeah.
Because really, I think in general, as a novice, you want to be focusing on just like the beat of the music and staying on the beat with your movement. In intermediate, I feel like you can kind of start adding some like musical elements into it, but nothing major. I feel like in advanced is when you really want to start playing around with very minute details in the music.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these two are a great example of that. Like they really have some fantastic moments where
Mm-hmm.
they're like acknowledging something in the music and really working with it, especially like this little moment right here.
I love
Right.
it.
Because I believe there's like a repetitive cadence in the music right
Mm-hmm.
here ish. And that's something that this particular styling is really solid at acknowledging.
Yeah. As a leader, having just a few patterns that you can extend in a repetitive way like that, having those in your back pocket makes phrasing a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Another example is once you have a follow in closed position in the middle of a whip, to stay in closed position and just pivot together for an extended period of time before sending them out of the whip.
Mm-hmm.
But it's stuff like that that allows for these kind of ramp ups. So here's an example of a ramp up to a phrase change, which we see very commonly. Spin the follow until she feels like she's going to die, and then dip her, or him, or they.
Just make sure that you are going to catch them.
Yes, that. I love how she chose to dissipate that energy going down into that dip. It was such a beautiful choice.
I also want to add in that I think these two in particular are great examples of, like, you can tell that they both can do a lot in their dancing. Like, they both clearly have a really high level of skill in their dancing already, but you can tell they're not like trying to show you that, right? It's you can see it here and there, but it's not something that you can see them being like, okay, well, I need to do something, right? They're really just enjoying the dance. They're enjoying dancing together. And I love that. I think that when you tend to get higher, in your skill level, you tend to be like, oh, well, I need to, show people that I can do this. And that's not really necessary, right? I think that what's good for higher level dancers is to have the skills to do things, but choosing the right moments to do them, right?
Yeah. It's like you want to become a chef. A chef isn't going to throw every ingredient in the kitchen into the pot. They're going to pick and choose what is appropriate for what they're trying to create. And no one who eats that food is going to think them any less of a chef because they didn't use every ingredient and every tool at their disposal. It's more about conscious choice to create the impact you want to have. And that's what you're going for. You're going for impact. You're not going for size or flair. You're trying to communicate things to your audience. And some of my favorite dancers that I look up to personally, what they do so effortlessly is they have a lot of impact without a lot of effort. So like I spoke about Brandy earlier, because you can do a very small, minute movement, but if you dance it in a certain way and engage with your partner and or the audience in a certain way while you do it, a small movement can have a huge amount of impact.
Yeah. Michael says, I'm an ex-chef and I love that analogy.
You're welcome. I've been doing some Duolingo during lockdown, right? So I've been picking up French again for the past like half a year. And it hurts my brain that in French, chef means boss. So anywhere you work, your boss is your chef. And I'm like, quoi? Quoi? Anyways, random tangent for the outtakes later.
I want to highlight this moment that's actually happening right now.
It's so excellent.
So he kind of set her up for something and waited on her to complete what she was doing. And I think that is very important, especially at this level, because like I said earlier, clearly both partners have a high skill level. So you don't want to just,
I love it so much.
Just walk right over your partner's moment.
and Anna's face is just delightful.
Same, Anna, same. But I love that he gives her moment and then is like, okay, my moment now.
It's a great moment of call and response. And we're going to have an episode on that later.
Yeah.
This month? Yes, this month.
Yes.
We're now in February.
But I know we also talked about that last week with Stanislav and Sayaka, where they both had those moments where it was like, I'm giving you the time to do this. Now it's my turn. And I think that's super important at higher levels.
Agreed. Oh, they're having so much fun.
I know.
All right. Onward and upward to All Star. We have Ken Rutland and Chantel Pianetta. It helps if I go find the link, doesn't it? Yes, it does.
Probably.
Link to the dance is in the chat. Go ahead and give it a watch. And when you're done, we will get to analyzing.
Mine's done.
Okay. All right. So one thing I want to highlight now that we have reached All-Star is with the musicality, because not only do they both accent the music as individuals, but they're not overpowering each other. They're still partnering. So we're not seeing that kind of unrefined partnering from advanced, but they're being purposeful about all the phrase changes. But in addition, their phrasing is lovely. So there's a difference between just dancing to a phrase change every 32 beats. It's like, yeah, we acknowledge the phrase change. Yay, moving on. As you become more advanced in your musicality, you are able to extend your phrasing throughout the song so that at any given point, the volume of your dancing is appropriate for that point in the music. And so you get this lovely kind of wave effect in the energy, in the size, and in the tone of the dancing. And it's just continually matching the music. And that's something that I really love about this dance in particular. And also we have returned to more simplicity over trying to do it all. So they're coming back to a chef.
Yes.
And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say in the preamble.
And I agree with you, Jen.
We're creating chef puns and I am here for it. Excellent. All right. Do the screen share.
I don't think we've done this so many times.
I know. My hand's I'm going to get carpal tunnel. So here we notice something interesting, like I alluded to earlier, is that they start in closed position with the closed position toward us. But the rest of their dancing in this dance outweighs that tiny nitpicky thing. So it's fine.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to change something, I would just turn them around. It's about that. That's kind of it, actually. Yeah, that's the one thing.
Yeah. And it does kind of work the way that they are starting it, because they're not starting it with one side open.
Right.
They are starting it fully enclosed. And so while yes, they're like more closed off side is to the audience because they're closed on both sides and they're kind of like honing in on each other, it's less obvious. It would be much more obvious if he just had the one hand up under her shoulder blade and then had the other arm just kind of hanging out.
Yeah, agreed. So we at this level are starting to see a lot of refinement. So not only more control, but at slow motion, that almost looked deadly, but I know she did that on purpose. Because he's not hitting her in the head. She's choosing to tip her right ear to her right shoulder to make this follow through prettier.
Yeah.
So it's an illusion that he's murdering her. He is not murdering her. She is styling that. Because it's prettier to have a full arc instead of a half arc.
Well, especially because of the height difference. When you're a lot closer to the height of your partner, when there is a type of neck roll or anything that's going underneath, it's going to look more drastic, right? So I think she's probably choosing to do this because if she just went underneath, it wouldn't look like anything really.
Yeah, because he's lifting his elbow high enough that, like, really, she didn't have to nod at all. I'm jealous. So there's not only refinement, but things become clearer. Like, so even though there are constantly smooth transitions between positions, those positions are still distinct and clear. There isn't any muddiness blending things together.
I also want to add in that somewhere between like advanced and all-star, leads especially tend to get really comfortable with momentum. And that's something that is great because it can make the dance much more dynamic.
Yes.
However, one thing to add to that, please don't give your follow too much momentum.
This is where with great power comes great responsibility. Yes. And it's very appropriate in this situation. Don't hate me for using that old reference that dates me.
I really love how much Chantal is paying attention to what he's leading her into. She's really not forcing anything.
Yeah, they both have this sense of being in the zone, in the connection with each other, which is something very palpable that the audience can feel and see.
Yeah. And another thing I want to kind of add is that, like, clearly that thumbs up in the bottom corner just distracted me.
Yeah, it's very
that came out of nowhere.
It's aggressive, that
anyways
thumbs up.
But clearly these are two dancers. They're all-star level, so they've danced together before. Like it's gonna be, hard for them to not have danced together before at this level. So they already kind of know how to adjust to each other. And I think that is something that's fairly evident, because I think Kipi is a leader that tends to like to have more control over what's going on. Like, he doesn't lead a ton of open-ended things. He does. He gives his follow freedom to do things, but he likes this particular exit, right? He grabs the shoulder and leads her around. He likes to be more involved in things.
Oh, so pretty. Was that an actual phrase length of one-footed spins? Because it felt like it going slow motion.
It might have been. I know it was a long.
It was long.
Yeah, she clearly is waiting on him because she knows he's going to lead her to do something.
I really love this detail. So they have the handhold here, but he lets go of it.
Yeah,
and they're no longer touching, and she's just following his hand and his shaping to follow through on what he led, and that's another thing. And I know this is something that Sarah Van Drake talks a lot about when she's coaching higher levels, is the idea of matching the shaping of your partner. Because not only does it look wonderful, but it's really functional.
Yeah.
Just by matching his shaping, prepped her for that turn, which is also indicative of how important shaping is for a leader to lead and prep things properly.
I kind of like to think of it as like when you have both ends shaping with each other, you have one whole unit. But if you just have one person shaping and the other one is not, it's kind of like a broken, like it doesn't connect well.
And extension of that looking like one piece is the timing now looks like one piece. So not only as individuals is their timing refined and clear and distinct, even though their transitions are so smooth, they have matched timing. So they're both on the exact same page for the rate at which they're moving.
Yep.
Which adds to that cohesiveness.
Yes. Shall we?
Yeah.
Scooch on to champ.
Last one.
We are looking at Robert Royston and Lorraine Baldovi.
'Tis fabulous.
Hopefully you've seen this dance before, but if you haven't, you're in for a treat.
Link is in the chat. Go ahead and give it a watch, and when you're done, we'll get to analyzing. All right, so there are a couple of things I want to talk about before we go into the screen share. And one of them is that now we've gotten to the point where all the champions have danced with each other almost infinitely at this point, and particularly this partnership. Like they used to do routines together. They know each other like the backs of their hands, and so they have a rich history, but also they both do other forms of dance. So they're able to incorporate, and because this is a swing competition and it's not randomly a waltz, like sometimes that kind of shenanigans happens. It's fun.
Yeah.
But they're incorporating shag and Lindy into this dance, and they're not solely doing West Coast swing. And because the techniques of all of those dances complement one another, it's really easy to transition between the two when you know them that well. They're paying really good attention to each other. Robert's phrasing is just, I mean, give up now. We'll never be that good. Basically. And I love how they do a really unique intro that still has the intimacy of closed position without actually being in closed position. Like I thought that was really unique. Yeah, to the screen share. Doodly doodly do.
One thing I do want to note just starting out is that as the dance kind of goes on, you can kind of see Lorraine relaxing into it more. And I think that's interesting. I think it is partially because she kind of changes what she does a little bit when she dances with other leads in general now. And so I think when she was in this, more familiar connection with Robert Royston, I think she was like, oh, okay, I remember this.
And while we're here, I want to talk about the song for a second.
Swanee.
Swanee is one of those songs that if you know how to dance to it, it can be a guaranteed first place. Like there are certain, particularly blues songs, that are like that. I myself have gotten a first place to Swanee. So as a dancer, it's really important to become incredibly familiar with that set of songs. Like just go up to any DJ and ask them if they would be willing to give you like a list because most of them know what they are, and become really familiar with them. And then to go a step above that, become familiar with all of the great dances to that song that have come before you. So a lot of times you'll watch all-stars dance or champions dance to particular songs, and they're making callbacks to either former routines or former Jack and Jills done to that same song. And so you may see something danced in a way that you're like, there wasn't anything earth-shattering about that. It's like, yes, the champions did it, therefore it was awesome. But you're like, why are they dying in the back? It's usually because it was a reference that you don't necessarily know. And so study your history. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Just like to note that Deborah in the background looks so excited. She looks like she's about to cry.
Yeah, pretty much.
So at this level, like, especially because they have danced together a lot before, so they kind of know the stylings that they're going to go for. And, it's kind of a preset dance almost, just based on, the styles that they both go into when they dance with each other. But that specifically helps them create these fantastically like musical moments, right? Because they can pick up on what the other is doing so quickly and go into it. And that's also in part because Royston is really good at managing weight transfers. And that is something that is super important for your partner to be on the same page as you.
Yes.
Right. So I've said this before, but if you as a lead are not managing the weight transfers of your follow well, you will get them into a position where if you want them to do something with you, they can't do it because of the position that they're in. If you set them up and manage their weight transfers well, they can just fall into the styling you want to do. So it's very important. Royston is fantastic at it. And that is a large reason why Lorraine very easily is like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. And you can kind of see it in some spots, right? Where there's like half a second. She's like, oh, this is what we're doing. But he's set her up to be ready for that.
Signature Royston. Excellent. Basically, the only thing that we don't have in this dance is the samba rolls.
That's true.
So once for a period of time, I was practicing with Leilani Nakagawa, one of our local dancers here in Portland, because we were planning on doing a Strictly together. And just for shits and giggles, I was like, hey, teach me real samba rolls. Like legit, like competitive samba rolls.
Yeah.
Because I can dance Royston Westy samba rolls. That's no problem. But then she taught me, and my lovely hypermobile joints decided to scream because they were furious at me. My hips went out. It was not pleasant. Anyways, end of story.
So I think that another thing to look at here is just really the technique that they're using. Lorraine specifically has a little bit more old style technique in general, just in her dancing. Royston has adapted more in his more recent dancing to, what is current. And I think that in this particular dance, he kind of goes back to, technique that was used 20 years ago. But it's still appropriate technique, and it's very appropriate, especially because of the song.
Yep.
And you'll see that he does that also when he dances with Deborah. And I think a large difference of this is that it becomes so like bouncy and like free feeling. And I think that A is to go with the music because it's such a like upbeat song. But B, just like, just to go with this particular technique that they're using. It works very well.
Yeah, it really does. If you can adopt a more classic swing style when you have a more classic swing song, it can make a huge difference. That's how we're able to tell what kind of music they're dancing to just based on watching their movement right now.
Yeah. And if you aren't quite sure what we mean about like more old style versus more like new contemporary modern technique, just think about the difference between what we're watching right now with like Lorraine and think about Victoria. It's very different, and that's the difference, right? Especially with this particular dance. Like what Lorraine is doing is much more old school.
All right. Is there anything else you want to say about this dance, Alicia, before we start wrapping up?
I don't think so.
Cool. I wish we had time to frame through the whole thing.
I know.
Next week, we are going to be framing through Lorraine's strictly first place from this same event with Ben Morris. So we will get to frame through that whole dance, which will be fun.
Yep. She placed first in both because
Double whammy.
fluorine.
Excellent. We had that question earlier about differentiating how you approach a single spotlight versus a 3-couple spotlight versus a heated environment. I already mentioned one thing is like making sure like the more people that are on the floor against you, the more important it is to show your number to the judges. So that's one thing to keep in mind. What do you want to say about that?
Ooh, there's a lot to say to it, but I mean, I think that in general, like the biggest difference is the space that you're filling with your dance. The less people that are on the floor with you, the more that space where you're projecting needs to expand. If you are in like an all skate, or if you're, heated, whatever, you don't need to be projecting. Maybe if there's like people right in front of you in the audience that, are paying attention to you, sure, absolutely. But like, it doesn't have to have that full energy that has to be there. The less people that are on the floor as you go. So I think that's the main thing.
Another thing to think of is like the fewer couples that are on the floor, the more time the judges have to watch you.
Yeah.
So it's actually beneficial to be in a spotlight because you can kind of relax a little bit more and trust in what you're capable of, because that will show through in the 2 to 2.5 minutes you're dancing.
Yeah.
And whereas it can feel more stressful in a heated environment or in a multiple couple spotlight, because you almost feel like you have to fight for the judge's attention. And I would say that's the wrong mindset to have. You're not fighting for attention because they're professionals. They will look at you.
Yeah.
So you just want to stay consistent with the level that you're capable of. And if you happen to get into a kind of zone, trust that will captivate. It's more about showing up and trusting in yourself than fighting for something.
Right. I think that what tends to happen is the more that we get towards a, spotlighted with just one couple, the more that people tend to feel they need to constantly be doing something. And that's why we get, some dances that just don't stop when we get to spotlights. But it should really be the opposite, because you have the full attention of everyone. You can take your time. You don't need to constantly be doing something, right? People in general can see the quality of your dancing if they take some time to look at you, right? You don't have to be like, oh, I can do all these things. You don't have to. But yeah, I think that's definitely.
And then that reminded me of another thing, is that there needs to be contrast in your dancing, especially in a spotlight, because your great big thing is only as big as your small thing is small. If you're dancing at a volume of 10 the whole time, the thing that you want to stand out will not be able to stand out. You need to have moments of volume at 1, volume at 3, volume at 2. Like you need to be transitioning up and down the scale of intensity in order for things to actually come through and just come across the way you want them to.
Yeah. We had like 4 different messages.
Okay. Quickly reads. Congratulations for moving into intermediate.
That's awesome. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We're glad this topic has been helpful. I have another idea of something we could talk about real quick, but are there any last minute questions that anybody has? Feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat. All right, I think that's a no. I was thinking we could just wrap up on a quick chat about nerves.
Mm.
So that seems appropriate for this topic.
It does.
So nerves, if you engage with them, will get worse. And I'm not going to tell you to just let it go. I'm not Elsa, although I am Norwegian. uh, but it can be helpful to learn basic grounding techniques for mindfulness, because what happens when you're nervous is you get up in your head and you're no longer embodied. You're no longer able to be present in your body in the moment, let alone with your partner and with the music at the same time. So one way to counter nerves is to really engage in your body. So one simple exercise is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you look around your environment and you name, and if it's possible to do so, it's really helpful to do this out loud, but I understand if you're like sitting in the chairs in the back, you can't necessarily say anything out loud. In other instances, you name 5 things you can see, and 4 things you can feel or touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And I know, like, taste can be hard. Like, maybe have a water bottle with you if you're sitting there in the back, because all water has a certain flavor. But just getting yourself back into your body and out of your head a little bit will not only help with your nerves, but if you're someone who tends to feel connectively different when you're competing than when you're social dancing, this kind of grounding can also help with that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I also want to add to, I think that it's helpful to not engage in everything happening around you. Like, focus in on your partner. I know that especially in spotlighted situations, like there's the pressure to perform, there's the pressure to, bring in the audience to what you're doing. But I personally would prefer to watch a dance where the partners are paying attention to each other, and that's creating some fun moments, and and has less moments where they're drawing in the audience. I would prefer to watch that than watch a spotlight where they're trying so hard to draw in the audience, but they're just ignoring their partners, right? I think that if you kind of focus in on the connection, on, what you're doing, generally there will be some natural moments that are created that you can use to draw in the audience. But I think in general, don't worry about that as much, right? I think that is also something that will become more natural as you do more of them, as you do more spotlights. But don't worry about it. Don't worry about having to perform, having to draw on the audience. It's not going to be helpful for you. It's going to add more pressure, right? And especially if you draw somebody that you haven't danced with before, like, you don't think about, okay, now how am I going to like make people see how good of a dancer I am? Just think about, okay, now how can I adjust to my partner? How can we have a good dance? That's my soapbox on that, really.
I 100% agree. Focusing on your partner. And we saw that tonight, especially with KP and Chantel. They were so engaged with each other that we were mesmerized by it. And so one thing to think about as an individual is like, what personality do you tend toward that seems more natural to you? Are you more like Sarah or Tara, who really love engaging with the audience, and that just comes naturally to them because they're natural born performers? That's who they are. They don't necessarily have to work at it, just comes. Whereas we look at KP or Bryn, for example, and they really just engage with their partner and have a wonderful time. And that is equally mesmerizing. So don't force yourself to be the opposite of what you naturally are.
Yeah, I don't really think that there were any like audience engaging moments in that dance of KP and Chantel. I
Not
really don't think there were.
explicitly, but the whole
No.
thing, we were just sucked
Exactly.
in and couldn't take
Yeah.
our eyes off of them.
Because you can create more interesting things if you're paying attention to your partner, and that's what's going to be interesting to watch. And if you go and look at, like, Melissa's my coach, so she's always my example. But if you go and watch like Melissa, you will notice if you're paying attention to how much they're engaging the audience, it's not that much, right? Especially those pros where you think like, oh my gosh, they engage the audience so much. They don't. They take advantage of certain moments, and that's what you remember. Like if you go watch Melissa, like there are very few moments that she is engaging with the audience. It's mostly engaging with her partner. A lot of times you'll even see her kind of like drop her eyes down to the floor to pay attention to the connection that she's getting. So,
yeah, I think ultimately what it is that creates mesmerization, like mesmerization, is that a word? The thing that mesmerizes the audience is how engaged in the moment the dancers are. And however that comes across naturally for them is equally mesmerizing. So like you were saying with Melissa, she's just enjoying herself, and she's in it, and she's present with it, and she is having the time of her life, and she is partnering her partner, and that's mesmerizing. Yeah. Sarah does all that, but also has a great time bringing us into the party with her.
Because she has
so we
that
feel like,
yeah,
it's like we feel like the third partner as opposed to just people who are loving watching it. And both are equally mesmerizing. So yeah.
Well, there was something else I was going to say. Oh, yeah. So one of the first times that I did work with Melissa, her advice was to, even if you aren't enjoying the connection, look like you're enjoying the connection. And that will, you know, pull people into the dance more because it looks like you're having a good time. And that's not to say that you have to project that to the audience. You don't. But like, as long as you look like you're enjoying yourself, it's going to be a pleasurable dance to watch. So, yeah.
And then a super meta thing, if you struggle to let yourself experience pleasure, that's going to not only hold you up in life, but in your West Coast swing. I think that's a good, awkward, earth-shattering place to leave it for the evening. We will be back next week with another episode. And for Chen's all the weeks thereafter, we're taking a break the week of my birthday in March. That's the future. And our fun size leader panel is coming up at the end of March, hopefully. We are currently scheduling that with our panelists. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Hope to see you back next week. And the replay of this episode will be up on our YouTube channel, Nerdy West Coast Swing, this Sunday afternoon Pacific time.
Yep. Right.
Have a good night.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Bye.
I just saw that. I was like,
Thank you. The outtakes. I forgot to hit record. And then
this is number like 45 or something. Apparently we're still figuring this out. Okay. I don't know.
I actually think tonight's episode 42. So it's the answer to everything. Yeah. Anyways, comparing and crafting.
Yes.
Wow. I am really tired today, people. I will eventually execute correct sentences. Okay.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. Space for information in my brain is at a high premium tonight. So I'm like, names. I
forgot that we had 2 more to go.
I'm juggling a mouse, a phone with my notes on it, and a pen. I do not have 3 limbs for this. All right. I always feel cursed to get songs I don't like in spotlights.
Yeah.
And like, I know the advice too, you dance as if that's your favorite song on the planet. I'm like, yeah, I know that's the advice, but I hate it.
I know, right? I don't want to do it. Side note though, I love how Chantel is led into a neck roll and she's like, oh, okay.
I dream of that life.
Like the 2 inches that she moves.
There
her
are
hip
maybe
down
5
to.
liters on this planet I can do that with.
Every time I watch KP, I think of how he's just like a slightly leaner version of Nick.
Yeah, you just like stretch Nick out, just like a few inches. You get KP.
Pretty much. I feel like they're both equally like, okay, time to dip you.
I remember the one time back when I was at the height of my eating disorder and was therefore real thin. I drew Nick in an All-American, and he did that whole plank me to the floor thing. And that's
great.
the terror. I'm more awake, but are my jokes any less bad? No. That I think that's what would go at the top of my resume if I wasn't an entrepreneur. But luckily, I'm stuck with myself, so I'm hired.
Deborah's just like immediately hype in the background.
It's like a kid in the candy store. She's like, "Oh, this is gonna be good."
I just can't get over Ryan and Chris. So funny.
I still like the headcanon that Chris just smells really good.
I love how when they get to the little kick line part, she kicks higher than him, and he's like,
he's like,
match
you. It made me very proud, and it makes me want to challenge him.
Who threw a shoe? Why
Someone
did I
threw a shoe?
There's 3 shoes on the floor. Oh, there's 4.
Were they coming from the audience or from the pros?
Both. There's like 5 different shoes on the floor right now. Anyways, mine's done.
Okay.
Sorry for the commentary, people.